Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for another NEARC Community Event. My name is Katie Grillo, and I'm the GIS Web Technology Specialist at the City of Cambridge, and I'm also your NEARC Board President. Most of you probably already know, but just to reiterate, NEARC is the Northeast ARC Users Group, and we are a volunteer-led nonprofit organization that hosts 2 annual conferences every year. We have the one-day event in the spring and a 3-day event in the fall. And this year, we're very excited to be coming back together in person at the Omni in New Haven, Connecticut on October 17th through the 20th. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of today's event. I'm joined today by Adam Kurowski. He is the Director of GIS and System Analyst at the town of Arlington, Mass. And then also Sarah Baker. She is the Planning and GIS Associate at the Greater Portland Council of Governments. And I'm going to just give a quick overview of our timeline for what to expect out of today's event. And then I'll hand it over to the 2 of them. So these community events are designed to be a bit more interactive than your traditional presentations. So we encourage you to join in on discussions, to ask questions, and we have other community events that we've been hosting throughout this year that we'll continue to do. The goal is to try to post one of these to you once a month. So today we are focusing on pulling together some of the thoughts and ideas that we've had from previous events, and then talking about how to identify the needs in our community and take action to move forward. So Adam, if you can please post the poll that we have. Just out of curiosity, I'd like to see how many folks have attended some of our past events. So if you have attended any of the events that we've had in the last few months, we had the role of geography in mapping and segregation. There was a census essentials and the mapping inequality. And for today's event, it's not necessary that you've attended any of these previous events. They are all recorded, just as this event is recorded. So you are welcome to go back and view some of that content on your own time. And let's see, I think it looks like most people have submitted, so we can go ahead and close that. And it's great to see a lot of you attended the mapping inequality and the census essentials, and a few folks also attended our segregation discussion. So welcome back. Thank you for coming again. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my screen and show you just a little bit about the call to action document that we've been working on from these past events. So we have, all right. Are you able to see my screen, Adam? Okay, great. Oh, sorry, just a moment. There we go. So the call to action that we've been working on, this is a way to try to pull together some of the thoughts and ideas that we've had from these previous events. So this spreadsheet is listed in reverse chronological order from our previous events. So starting with the last tab, which was our first event, we focused on segregation and social justice themes. So for that event, together we watched a video called Segregated by Design, and we talked about some of the ways in which the history of segregation and how federal, state, and local governments unconstitutionally segregated every major metropolitan area in our country. So from that event, we learned a lot about the history. And then what we were trying to do is think about what topics around geography specifically can you relate back to your community, or what topics are you curious about for your own community? So some of the themes that we saw here were zoning and demographics. There was some topics around green space or access to nature. And then there was some other themes in relation to housing and transit or commuting equity. So the first step was to try to think about these different topics and then take that a little bit further to say, can you imagine a project that you could create to explore this theme. And now I'm not going to go through everything in this document. I just want to give a high level overview just so that it kind of gets some of the gears turning so you can start to think about some of the ideas that folks have had. So we started with the idea, and then we thought about what sort of project you could create from this and how you could potentially adjust your project methodologies to ensure that you aren't negatively impacting any specific groups, or more importantly, to think of how you can benefit specific groups. The next event that we did was the Census Essentials, and for this event, David Craker, the data dissemination and GIS specialist from the US Census Bureau, showed us how we can search and find different types of census data on the census website. We then asked our attendees to think about what questions would you like to try to answer using this data. And again, there was a lot of focus on different languages that were spoken at home, or the cost of living, that kind of thing, and different services that might be available to individuals within the community. In the Mapping Inequality event, we had Justin Madrone, who is the GIS project manager and analyst at the Digital Scholarships Lab at Richmond and University of Richmond. And Justin and his colleagues are working on mapping historic redlining data. And they have a tool called Mapping Inequality, which brings one of the country's most important archives to the public. So we, as GIS professionals, can access this information now through both the Living Atlas. And we also learned how we can access some of the census data through the Living Atlas as well. So it was just trying to think about different ways to pull all this data together. And now what we're trying to do today is take some of these topics, some of this information we've learned, and use it to identify a need in our community or in our organization. So we have with us today Sarah, who went through this process in her organization, where they identified a need. They thought about what sort of data they needed and what a potential solution might look like. So what we're going to do is pass things over to Adam and Sarah so we can learn more about how to identify the need, and then we will come back, do some breakout rooms where you all can look at this document a little bit closer and try to fill in some needs in your community, and then Sarah will show us more about the project that she's working on. So Adam, Sarah, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and I'm very grateful for being here today and being part of this conversation, as well as the learning path that Katie just described. So thanks to her, and thanks to NEARC, and thanks to Sarah and you all for being here. So like Katie said, Sarah actually attended the last session, which was NEARC's Mapping Inequality event in April. And due to the call to action that Katie just mentioned, Sarah reached out to us and wanted to let us know about a project that she was working on. So thank you, Sarah, so much for taking that step to reach out to us, and also building an amazing project that we're going to talk about here today. So let's jump into it. Let's hit on some of the high-level aspects of how you took your project from idea to action, because your experience and the process that you followed will be helpful here today as we work through a similar process with this group. So Sarah, how did you identify the needs of your organization and your community of users?
So my organization is both a regional planning organization, and we recently merged with our metropolitan planning organization. So there's been a lot of projects that we've been taking on that are kind of merging like the local needs with also regional needs around the city, and also reconnecting them to the suburbs, and making sure that we are following all of like our federal guidelines that we have, receiving federal funding for being a metropolitan planning organization, and trying to make sure that we're integrating in the equity data that we have been publishing in our reports, and not just having it be like the last bit that we add into the report when we're considering funding for a transportation project, like putting in bus stop locations or paving roads or replacing culverts and bridges. and trying to get that data into the hands of the people that are making the decisions. So instead of having a PDF map of protected populations, which I can share my screen and show you the mandates that we are subject to try to kind of right the wrongs of historically what organizations and what governments did with transit, building highways through neighborhoods and having adverse health effects because of that, like as for asthma when I-95 was built through a neighborhood. So that would be kind of the environmental justice component. And then on the other side of doing the projects, it's also not just the outcome of the project, but making sure that we're considering these people's opinions along the whole way. So when we're doing outreach, if we're planning a project that would affect a neighborhood that has a higher proportion of people that don't speak English, for example, we're going to need to make sure that we get responses from people who don't speak English enough to make sure that we're being fair and hearing from the majority of people that the decision might affect. So what we decided to do is take this census data that we had traditionally looked at that hit on these few points, and that we averaged out to kind of do scoring for projects, and take it from just a PDF map and turn it into a digital map. And that need kind of evolved because a lot of people that we work with aren't necessarily GIS professionals, but they need access to the data in a map form. So we decided to go with a story map. And so the need was there all along for this data, and it was just kind of figuring out the best way to present it, which is why we decided to go with ArcGIS Online. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess I can summarize it just by saying sounds like a holistic approach where you understood how you acted in the past, you had some legit guidelines to follow, and you kind of projected out in front of you to really understand the project as a whole, as opposed to just maybe one channel or one avenue of it. Yeah, so thank you for that summary. And part of that, you mentioned a PDF map, you mentioned some parts of the solution, but how did you best visualize maybe what the solution or the ultimate goal may be of the project?
So I guess knowing that we were going to need to overlay data with this equity data. So for instance, we're looking at where certain loans have been granted, making sure that we're not only granting them in certain neighborhoods or funding projects in certain neighborhoods. So I think the need to not just have a static map, but be able to throw a layer on it if we want to look at it in a certain way, because certainly there's a lot that we could do with this data, and we're really in the early stages of kind of developing a whole lot of tool sets having to do with like our sustainability projects, such as like climate adaptation, equity, and then there's the whole public transportation side of our organization that, and then also regional planning. So for instance, one of the projects that someone's working on, who's actually on this call, Madeline, is our brownfield sites. So if a town is hoping to buy a property, or if they own a property that's a potential brownfields and they're deciding between two of them that they might want to develop, how can we look at that as compared to the more vulnerable populations that we're getting at with these federal mandates? So I think the need to help people that maybe are towns who outsource their GIS work to a contractor and they don't have the tools or the maybe they don't have the knowledge, or maybe they don't have the staff capacity to do this kind of analysis, that we can help them do it kind of upfront and provide it as a tool for everyone in our community, which is, we have about 30 member communities that we kind of collaborate with. So most of them in Cumberland County, but a few outside. So
that's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you're building a tools for self-service, so that folks, even without the technology or the skills in-house to do something like this, you're providing them that access point. And I know from my perspective, it's easy to throw a PDF up there and it's easy to have your analysis lost in a report somewhere. So building something like this from a PDF to something bigger, yeah, that takes some great thought and a little bit of extra effort. So I applaud you and Madeline for that. What do you think is the potential impact of this project on your organization and your community of users?
I'm hoping that it gets our members and also within our organization thinking more about what data is out there and how we can use it to help make decisions, important decisions about the future of the region, and also getting people comfortable with the idea of just using web maps in general. A lot of people are unfamiliar with them, or they think it's really hard to put together. So I did want to show just the living atlas of the world. If you can, if anybody missed the census presentation, it's super easy, and you can pull in a lot of these variables that I'm looking at. And then there's so much more out there. So yeah, my hope is that within our organization that we start infusing this kind of data into a lot more of our work, and outside, hopefully these decision makers have it in their hands instead of it being buried in a report somewhere that they can maybe bookmark it and open it up if they're thinking about a project.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm feeling like an underlying thread that kind of connects this all is raising awareness of equity and inclusion, and especially the data and mapping component of that, which may have been forgotten about in the past by a lot of us. And yeah, having that focus, knowing that all of these data sets exist out there, I think that's very powerful to bring them to the forefront, bring them to your community. So thank you for all the work you've done on this project, and we're going to dig into it more throughout today, but I think you've set a good example for us to build from in the next phase of today's event. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Sarah and Adam, for that. What we're going to do now is I'm going to put you all into some breakout rooms so that we can try to think about some of these topics together. So I'm going to put you into rooms just for 8 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is start by just saying your name and where you're from, just so that we can get to know each other a little. And then we will also put the, Adam, if you have it, can you put the call to action link in the chat as well, please? So Adam's putting a few links in the chat right now that are going to allow you to focus on some specific questions. And the idea here is that we want to try to fill in a row in that call to action spreadsheet. So we're going to start by thinking about what are the needs in your community or amongst your users, and then what would be the goal of a project and sort of the potential impact of that. So I will go ahead and put you into those rooms, and we'll see you back here in just about 8 minutes.
Hey, Katie.
Hello. Do you mind if I crash your party? I saw there was just 2 of you in here, so.
Yeah, Carol was just saying that she's from upstate New York and she teaches GIS, which is amazing.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to say I'm so glad you did the mapping inequality project, because about 4 weeks after that, I had a student asking how she could get hold of redlining data. And now she's using that website, and she's using the data in the Living Atlas too. So, and she didn't even knew GIS existed. So this,
oh, wow.
This is exciting. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So did you get the link to the document?
I
Yes.
did, yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, do we need to fill something in? Sorry.
Yeah, so over on the community need tab is where we're trying to think about a particular need in your organization. I don't know if either one of you can think of something along those lines.
Yeah, I was trying to think. So I work for the historic preservation in Rhode Island for the state. And a lot of what I do is just mapping historical properties or places. And the only thing I could think of is how we do archaeological sites, and it's a lot connected with the Native American communities. But a lot of that we cannot share with the public because it's archaeological sites. So I'm just trying to think how we can, I mean, I guess I can build it for in-house, and then if someone is interested in it, we could share, but
Yeah.
it's just me and my companies. I'm trying to think how I can do it by myself, and I don't know.
All right, how did we do? I can see a few people were able to start to get some ideas into that call to action sheet. I encourage you to maybe just take a minute or so just to try to put in something from the discussion that you just had. And it's okay if you don't have a fully fleshed out idea just yet. We're trying to get the ball rolling here. So what we're going to do now is I'd like to pass it back over to Sarah so that she can spend a little bit more time discussing her particular project and her success story, really. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to take a look at anything that's in the sheet just yet, or if you just want to dive.
I'll pop open my map because I don't think I showed it yet. Here's just, I did decide to do the story map format. This is kind of the old school, one of the older formats, but it still works. If you make a map with the Map Viewer Classic is what I would recommend. Don't use the Map Viewer if you want to do one of the older map series. But anyways, I decided that talking about what equity versus equality would be helpful just to get an audience familiar with that idea. So whether that's as a publicly facing map or for our member communities, just opening that dialogue about the level of the playing field never being level to start, and how different people need different resources due to their specific needs because of systemic inequalities or other things. So I also mentioned like overlaying data. So these are our priority corridors and centers as a regional transportation agency. And I also tried to map this other project that we've been working on where someone categorized limits to multifamily zoning in the area, and maybe seeing how that could disproportionately impact other areas differently. So, like I said, there's really no limit to the kind of stuff you could overlay with this data, but those were just two things that I thought might be especially relevant and were kind of recent things. So, the multifamily was a recent project that we just wrapped up. So I thought it would be nice to use it for something else besides just a report again.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt, can you please pop this oh, Adam just did it. Thank you. The link to the story map is in the chat if anybody wants to take a look at it.
Yeah, and I can link you to the website as well. There you go. So we decided to link to our website to just add a little bit more context about the data sources and the different mandates. So it's embedded here, but I just opened up in the full screen to show it to you guys. And so we average these all out to kind of make our map of what areas are the highest for all of them. And it's something that we're kind of still working on, is maybe developing a new way of scoring projects. It's in the works as a part of one of our long range plans for transportation. But yeah, I highly recommend people to check out the Story Maps platform. It's it's a little daunting at first, but it's pretty quick. Once you get going with it, you learn pretty fast. So if you haven't used it, don't be scared. And I think the idea would be to kind of, for something like vehicle access, for example, looking at food deserts, you know, we could map how long it takes someone to get to the grocery store via car or via walking, if many people don't have a car in that neighborhood, for instance, and just look at how we could maybe add in a bus line to bridge that gap. Or maybe there's a lot of green space that's kind of disconnected. And if we added in a trail here, that would make a better regional connection. And there's a lot of those projects going on around the region. So I guess I'm hoping to just kind of help be a collaborator of that data and reach out to our member communities in my my new role with the organization, just starting full-time last month. So that's kind of my goal with this project, and to just get the data out there for people that need it. And yeah, our outreach process is really just starting. We kind of have it up on our website, and just putting feelers out to a USM professor who we thought would be a good person to start with. And also something I wanted to recognize about using census data is that there are certain populations that are hard to count because, you know, you're not necessarily going to be trusting the census who hasn't been, you know, historically very trustworthy. So yeah, I think there's a long way to go in terms of other projects we could do with it, but yeah, just kind of scratching the surface with getting the census data out there to start. And if anyone has questions, or if Adam, you had anything to add.
I'll just reiterate what I said before. I love the underlying focus on equity. And I think you've outlined a lot of like really nice sections here that could be used as a template and replicated in various areas. So yeah, thank you for your thoughtful design and layout.
Thanks.
And it looks like Neil had a question. Neil, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. First, this is really cool, Sarah. This gives me a lot to think about and talk about with students and faculty at Vassar, because these are all kinds of topics that are of interest. And we've worked with some organizations on kind of granular projects that have to do with one or another aspect of this. But it's really interesting to have all this information presented in kind of these different equity silos, for lack of a better term. The thing it makes me think of is the social vulnerability index. I think it's this USDA put that out. They did analysis. I think they did a block group level analysis for the country. I know they did county level, and I don't know if they got down to maybe they got down to tract level. I can imagine us doing something at Vassar that sort of follows this outline, maybe from the approach of social vulnerability, or maybe using some of these same categories you're using. Anyway, my question is, you mentioned specifically the limits to multifamily zoning. So is the idea behind that like that tends to be a more affordable housing, and so limits to multifamily housing sort of creates limits to affordable housing? Is that the idea?
Yeah, there's I think generally just a really big housing shortage in Maine. I'm sure it's similar elsewhere in New England and the Northeast and all over the country. But yeah, especially looking at our zoning, there's a lot of kind of broad stroke approaches taken with resource protection in the early 2000s, and minimum lot sizes, parking requirements. You know, I'm not a zoning expert, but I was working with someone who was very well versed in zoning, and I was just kind of on the GIS side of this project. But from my understanding, it's a project that the county has taken on, Cumberland County, and they're hoping to kind of propose like a 10-year plan for, you know, helping towns adjust their zoning to be more friendly for multifamily housing. And yeah, I think the thinking is that in increasing density of housing will ultimately lead to more affordability. So yeah, again, I'm not like a super expert on the zoning stuff, but from just looking at it, there was very, very little land that in the county that was classified as having few limits to zoning. And that was some areas that were maybe it says, you know, maybe it could even be called like their multifamily or multi-use area, but just there's too many restrictions on it that make it unattractive for a developer to buy up. So, you know, they'll pass on that and go elsewhere. So
Sure.
the hope is to kind of, I think with that project, look at it from that lens of would I buy this as a developer? Is it too risky? Would I have to go get a contract or conditional approval for it? And yeah, if the towns can remove those barriers, then hopefully there'll be more housing in the areas where it's needed more, closer to the cities, leading to less you know, need for people to have cars, and you know, people can be closer to their jobs, and yeah, following all the best principles of planning, basically.
So quick follow-up to your
Yeah.
question. The way that you've classified low and medium or high limits to multifamily housing, is the background for that explained in the civil rights dashboard or in the story map? Like what are
No.
those variables?
Yeah, that's a great point that I could link to the report in this, and I can send a link along as well if people are interested in checking that out. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sarah, we also had a question from Pam. She was wondering if you can tell us more about the PACS equitable target areas. And she was wondering, how did you determine those scores?
So those were determined by our transportation team. And it takes into account a lot of this kind of infrastructure data of, you know, where there's population centers and also where there's access to public transit and where there's not, where certain improvements need to be made. So yeah, I didn't develop that score. That's something that isn't a separate part of our organization, but yeah, I can link to that document as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just wondering what the real drivers were for that to really target those areas. That's really interesting that, and what overlaps they might have seen, or what overlaps you might have seen with some of the other data that was feeding into it, and how, I guess, you know, how the transportation program is thinking about what they're going to do with those target areas. What are their, you know, plans? I'd just be interested in that moving forward. I'm not the transportation planner here, but I can forward that info to that person.
Great. Sarah, did you have anything else that you wanted to show us about the steps you went through, or the process that now you're in for sharing and promoting this content?
No, I think we're pretty up to speed. As I mentioned, we're kind of just starting outreach, and yeah, if anyone has any comments, like I said, I'm very open to it, to hearing your feedback as well. It's early days.
Great. Well, let's take a peek at some of the entries that folks put into the sheet. Is there anyone that would like to talk a little bit about the entry that they put in here? Talk a little bit about the need and some of the data layers that they might be using? It looks like, so I'll just start doing an overview, but if anybody wants to jump in or has questions or comments, please do. So the first one I'm seeing here is the idea of creating a story map to share archaeological data with the Native American communities. And this story map application, this would be a in-house tool because I understand that some of the Native American data is protected or sensitive. And so when you are thinking about your projects, remember that they don't always have to be public facing initially. You could start with an internal tool just to try to get some traction, and then think about how you can then create something or extend that so that it can be more for public engagement. We also have one here that's thinking about how to serve in terms of economic impacts and equity. And that's definitely a big need. That's a very high level type need, but it's a great place to start and then potentially drill down from there. And
Katie,
Sarah, yeah, go ahead, Adam.
I was going to say, I'll jump in and talk about my group's one if we still have time.
Sure, yeah.
It's the affordable housing one. We talked about a clear need in the community was the need for more affordable housing and how to go about that, where they had already explored certain avenues, but kind of pulling it together with the university and the students to build it into more of a project as opposed to just an exploration, where they would use renter versus owner information, housing prices, household income to figure out where the needs may be in the community, and really digging into that living atlas to pull out some of the great census data and other homes data that's involved there. But yeah, I think this process led to the development of a tool like Sarah's as more than just building an example, but building a resource for the community of Poughkeepsie and partnering with them as well as the students at Vassar College.
Katie, I can talk about the one above that. Thinking about environmental justice in terms of conservation measures. I think, especially here in Vermont, we're so conservation focused and environmentally focused, but we don't really think about, number one, engaging more vulnerable communities or vulnerable populations, or thinking through the Native American lens or the BIPOC lens. And there may be some conservation things that happen out there that may not be best for those communities, or that they may want something different. And I just don't think it's even thought of, even on the regional level or on the local level. And I think that that's something that Vermont could really do better at, and bringing those folks to the table, because there may be a better need for, say, there's going to be, buyout or something, like a FEMA buyout or something like that, that's going to be turned into a park for conservation measures. But maybe there's some other need that would be just as important or more important for that community, and not even thinking about it. I think that's what I see happening a lot. And I've heard a lot from BIPOC community up in Burlington that, Vermont is so eco, but they're not thinking of other populations and communities. So not really sure what project or what data layers would be, almost thinking, I'm not really, I haven't wrapped my head around yet the data layers that would be used to work on this, but I think at least starting at the regional level with our regional plan, and at least thinking about it within that regional plan, would be a start.
Yeah, is there, Sarah, is there any advice that you think that you could offer to any of these topics?
Yeah, it can sometimes be, overwhelming to know where to get started. That's what Karen and I kind of talked about with GIS work. I would say don't be afraid to just connect with other people that you might be able to collaborate with. I was saying to Adam and Katie that the world's gotten a whole lot smaller this past year, and just reaching out and seeing what other people are working on that may be similar, may have a similar need, maybe use the call to action document, for example, and see if anything kind of strikes a chord with you. But yeah, that's kind of my broad advice. No specifics.
Yeah, it's like you said, it can be overwhelming at first, but I think that's why it's important to have these types of discussions, just to hear what some other folks might be thinking about or what other folks in communities might be doing, just so that you can get more ideas. And I guess, were there any other questions or comments right now before we move into a little bit of a quick wrap up on ideas and ways to move forward? All right, so I heard a quote from a woman named Rachel Cargill the other day that said that allyship is knowledge plus empathy plus action. And I feel like that really resonated with me, to think about how you can't really have true allyship with just one of those pieces. You really need to have the knowledge and understanding and the empathy to be able to care, and then the action to try to make an impact. So I think the first step here, and really what we've done, and it's clear from a lot of you, even if we think back to that poll that we had at the beginning of what other events have you attended, you know, we're clearly all on this path of educating ourselves, and this is a really important place to start. But you know, it's the idea that you can't fix a problem that you don't know exists. And that's a quote from Emmanuel Acho, who did his Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. So there are tons of resources out there. I really encourage you to keep moving forward on this journey towards better understanding and better knowledge on these topics. As I just mentioned, Rachel Cargill, Emmanuel Acho, Ibram Kendi, and Robin DiAngelo. I mean, the list just goes on. There's so many amazing voices and folks out there that are focusing on these topics. But we as GIS professionals, we have a lot of resources available to us as well. So there is Esri has a hub page that is called the GIS for Racial Equity Hub. And let me go ahead and share a couple things with you. And that hub has a lot of information about how to get started. It has a lot of different types of data that you can access. They even have contact information so that you can work directly with them. And through this Equity Hub, they also are offering a number of different presentations and webinars. So I know it's short notice, but there is another webinar coming up today at 1 p.m. So directly following this presentation, there is a Esri webinar that talks about achieving transportation equity through GIS. Another great resource that Sarah actually brought up to us is the King County GIS Center has a number of different training programs available as well. And they have a GIS for Equity and Social Justice workshop that's going to be hosted on August 4th. And Sarah attended that event, and she said that it really, and Sarah, I guess I don't have to speak for you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that program?
Yeah, so Greg Babinski, who runs this program, works for King County, and he was also an ethical geo fellow last year. So he kind of really dug into the GIS code of ethics and applying it to GIS work, and developed a best practice manual for using GIS for equity and social justice. And he kind of walks through the history of mapping, and why we have a duty to you know, make sure that we're using it for good and not to promote more inequities. So yeah, I highly recommend it if you have the time and resources. It definitely changed the way I thought about my work, and yeah, really a great training. I think it was like a half day, yeah, 11 to 3. So it was a full day almost, but and it was jam-packed full of knowledge and resources. And I pasted to some of the resources, like his the GIS for ESJ best practice manual. I can post that in the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And just so folks know, I will send a follow-up email after this event with a link to the recording as well as links to some of these different resources and Sarah's projects that we've talked about today. So there are things posted in the chat right now, but don't worry about copying them all because I will email you later as well. So yeah, so it's really this knowledge, this idea of taking the time to educate yourself and learn more, but then I encourage you to also, as we're here today, to think about is the process of taking action. So we as GIS professionals we have a lot of different resources and ways that we can move forward, but you can also just think of yourself as an individual and looking at your own community. And when you think about identifying that need, try to take a closer look at some of the systems and institutions that are around you. And similar to what Pam was saying, try to think about those systems and those institutions from the point of view of a person of color. Like, how would a Black woman look at these systems, and how is a Black woman or a Black man impacted or affected by some of these systems and institutions? And really keep the conversations going. Be that annoying person, be that person that keeps showing up and keeps asking the question and keeps wondering why things aren't happening a certain way, but bringing that up to people in your community. You know, there's a lot that people will do just to get someone to stop asking. So if you can focus on a distinct measurable goal and you can focus on one task that you want to accomplish, then just keep drilling on that one thing, and it's amazing what you can accomplish from that. I do encourage you to really collaborate with others. As Adam mentioned at the very beginning here, Sarah came to us with her project idea, and that's what made this event today possible. So I really encourage you to collaborate with others and collaborate with us here at NEARC. If you have projects or questions or ideas, you can get in touch with me, please, and we'd be happy to try to work with you and support you. Along those lines, we are working with Esri to try to pull together a NEARC ArcGIS Online hub, and we hope that this will be a place where folks can share their work and their projects in the Northeast, just to, again, focus on that collaboration piece. And as I mentioned, we do have the fall conferences coming up. The fall NEARC will be coming up in person in October. And we currently have a call for abstracts right now. And I would absolutely love to see a social or environmental justice track, an entire session track, maybe even two, but we can start with one. But in order to have that tracked, we need to receive the presentations. So I really encourage you, we've spent a lot of time working on this call to action document. There's a lot of great ideas in there. So consider submitting a presentation. And I, for one, know that sometimes just submitting the project abstract can act as a really great motivator and a clear deadline for you to focus on a project and try to have something done with a clear deadline. So I highly encourage you, please submit an abstract for our fall event. And then just one last piece that I want to say is if you're still unsure on what to do and how to move forward, then I encourage you to just donate. Donate your time to organizations that do have a clear goal and a clear path, or donate financially if you are in a position where you're able to do that. And NEARC does not promote or endorse any specific organizations, but I do encourage you to just try Googling it. Google something like racial equity or racial justice. Do a little bit of fact finding to make sure that it's a respectable organization. Search for organizations that are founded or led by Black leaders, and donate your money or donate your time to the great causes and great projects that folks out there are already working on. Are there any other questions or comments that folks want to share?
I just want to thank you, Katie, for stepping into this role and stepping into this space. It takes some bravery and your effort to raise all of our awarenesses around racial equity and social justice in the GIS lens. Yeah, it's powerful. I can feel it. So thank you for taking that step.
Well, thank you, Adam, and thank you all for joining. Something else that I heard recently that really resonated with me is that this work that we're doing here is not meant to be self-development or self-promotion. It's the work that we're doing is for the Black community, and the work that we're doing is to help protect and rise up Black lives. So keep to that mission, and that's really the way forward. So thank you all so much for coming, and we do have a few other community events in the works. So please keep an eye on our website for more details on that, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a great presentation.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah.